The north wind carried the smell of iron and coming snow, and it cut clean through the holes in Levi Carrington's coat. The graze along his right shoulder had stopped bleeding hours ago, only to tear open again when his horse stumbled in a frozen creek bed 10 miles outside of town. Now, the wool was soaked dark, and the cold air turned the wet patch to stinging ice against his skin. His horse, a tough little buckskin mare, was favoring her left foreleg. She was done. Levi knew he was not far behind. He pulled the brim of his hat low, sinking his chin into his collar. Scar Hollow looked just as he had left it 6 years prior, a handful of false front buildings huddled together against the vast, unforgiving gray of the Wyoming Territory. The Sawtooth Mountains clawed at the sky to the west, already disappearing into the bruised purple clouds that promised a blizzard. He had left Cheyenne 2 days ago with 3 bullets and a fresh horse, leaving a dead man on a saloon floor and a posse that wanted his blood. The fight had not been his to start, but it had been his to finish. That was the way of it. Ever since he had first ridden out of this very town, the graze on his shoulder was a lucky parting gift. He kept the mare to a slow, pained walk down the center of the main street. It was late afternoon, that dead time before dusk when the wind always seemed to holler loudest. A few faces turned to watch him pass. He saw them through the slit beneath his hat. Mr. Henderson, still running the dry goods store, looked older, his face mapped with worry. 2 women, wrapped in heavy shawls, stopped their conversation to stare. They saw a drifter, wounded and riding a lame horse. They saw trouble, but they did not see Levi Carrington. 6 years was a long time. He had left a boy of 19, all sharp angles and dumb pride. The man who returned was thicker, worn smooth in some places and carved rough in others. A beard covered the jaw that had once been clean, and his eyes had seen too much to hold any of that old, bright hope. He was a ghost, and he was grateful for it. He rode past the livery, past the saloon where the light was already spilling yellow onto the boardwalk, past the sheriff's office. He did not look. He just kept riding until the street turned to mud and hardened ruts, to the last building on the edge of town. The sign was still there, swinging on one hinge. The paint flaked almost to bare wood. Monroe's Fine Tailoring. It was a miserable-looking place, a squat, clapboard structure that seemed to lean away from the wind. It was where the respectable town ended and the wilderness began. It was the only place he could go. Inside, Willa Ray Monroe was dying of the cold. The small potbelly stove in the corner of her workshop put out just enough heat to keep her fingers from seizing, but not enough to fight the drafts that snaked through the floorboards. She sat hunched over her sewing machine, her feet tucked beneath her on the stool, feeding a heavy wool skirt under the chattering needle. It was another alteration for Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's wife, a woman who would not meet Willa's eyes when she dropped off the garment, but who still expected the finest stitch work in the territory. Willa provided it. She provided it because the $5 she would earn from this skirt would buy flour and kerosene for the next 2 weeks. Willa Ray Monroe was a pariah, and she knew it. She was the woman whose family had been run out of town 6 years ago. Run out because her father, a good and simple man, had been accused of helping an outlaw escape. But Willa knew the truth. It was not her father who had helped him. It was her. The town did not know the specifics. They only knew that Levi Carrington, a wild-eyed boy with too much fire, had gotten into a fight with the mayor's nephew. They knew that fight had ended with the nephew laid out cold and Levi vanishing into the night. And they knew the Monroes were to blame. The whispers had followed her every day since. She heard them in the dry goods store when she bought thread. She saw them in the eyes of the women who crossed the street to avoid her. That's her, the one who sided with a killer. They had stripped her of her friends, her family, and her name. Her father had died of shame and a broken heart in a sod hut in Nebraska 2 years later. Her mother had followed him that same winter. Now, all Willa had was this shop, the last piece of property her father had owned, and the silent, crushing judgment of Scar Hollow. She finished the seam and bit the thread. Her fingers stiff. The light was fading fast. Outside, the wind had picked up a new voice, a high-pitched scream that rattled the window panes. A storm, a bad one, was coming. She stood and stretched, her back aching. She was tired, not just tired from the work, but tired all the way down to her bones, a deep, 6-year exhaustion. She stoked the stove, adding 2 small pieces of wood. She would eat her supper of cold bread and beans. And then she would read a page or 2 from the one book she owned before the light failed completely. This was her life. She stopped, her hand on the stove poker. Her breath plumed in the air. She remembered, suddenly and with a clarity that stole the air from her lungs, the last time she had seen a storm like this moving in. It was the night Levi left. The memory was not soft. It was sharp, all adrenaline and fear. The smell of whiskey and blood in her father's barn. Levi, his face bruised, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You have to help me. Willa, they'll hang me." He had not been asking. She remembered the feel of the horse's reins in her hands. Her own mare, the best one they had. She remembered leading him out the back way, into the teeth of a blizzard that had covered his tracks by morning. She remembered the kiss he gave her. It was not gentle. It was desperate, a raw press of lips, a promise of return that tasted like a lie even as he spoke it. "I'll come back for you. I swear it." Willa. He had lied. He had never come back. He had left her to face the ruin he had made. Willa shook her head, forcing the memory down. That girl was gone. That soft, trusting girl was dead and buried with her parents. She was stone now. She had to be. A heavy thud against the back door made her jump, the poker clattering against the stove. She froze. No one ever came to the back door. Drunks from the saloon sometimes stumbled this far. But this was different. It was not a knock. It was the sound of a body hitting the wood. "Who's there?" Her voice was thin, swallowed by the wind. A low groan answered her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from the stove, its end still warm, and crept toward the door. "Go away! I've got a scattergun!" It was a lie. She had sold her father's gun for food 3 winters ago. Another thud, and this time the door creaked open an inch. The flimsy latch, rotten with damp, gave way. The wind blasted the door open, sending a swirl of snow and dead leaves into the room, extinguishing the single lantern on her table and plunging the shop into near darkness. A figure filled the doorway, black against the fading gray light. It was a man, slumped and heavy. He took 1 step inside and fell to his knees, then pitched forward onto the floorboards, his face hidden. Willa screamed, scrambling back. She raised the poker. The man did not move. He lay in the snow that melted around him, a dark shape on her clean floor. "Get up," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Get up and get out." He only groaned, a sound of such profound agony that it cut through her fear. He was hurt. He was dying. She edged closer, the poker held high. She used her foot to nudge his shoulder, pushing him onto his back. His hat fell away. The room, her life, the whole world stopped. The wind died. The chattering of the machine faded. There was only silence. Levi Carrington. He was not the boy she remembered. The face was gaunt, covered in a rough beard. But it was him. His eyes were closed, his skin the color of ash. A dark, wet stain was spreading across his right shoulder and chest. Willa stared, unable to breathe. He was here. The ghost, the devil who had destroyed her life, was bleeding to death on her floor. Her first thought was pure, cold rage. She should let him die. She should drag him back outside, lock the door, and let the storm take him. It would be justice. It would be the end. He moaned again, a sound so small it barely registered. His eyes fluttered open, slits of darkness, unfocused and confused. He tried to speak, but only a bloody cough escaped him. She looked at the wound. She looked at his face, the face she had once traced in her dreams, the face that had haunted her waking nightmares for 6 solid years. She saw the pain in him, and the woman who had died 6 years ago stirred. "Damn you," she whispered. The words were a prayer and a curse. "Damn you to hell. Levi Carrington." She dropped the poker. She kicked the door shut, fighting the wind, and slammed the heavy iron bolt across it. The sound echoed in the tiny shop, like a gunshot. She dragged him. He was heavier than he looked. She pulled him by the arms, his boots scraping the wood, until he was near the stove. The faint, flickering light from the stove's grate cast moving shadows over his face. He was barely conscious, shivering violently. "Willa," he breathed, just her name. "Be quiet." Her voice was sharp, brittle. She lit the lantern again, her hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries. The yellow light filled the room, making the scene more grotesque. She fetched her shears, the heavy ones she used for cutting canvas. "This is going to hurt," she said. There was no pity in her voice, only a cold, flat finality. She cut his coat away, the wet wool parting. His shirt beneath was a ruin of cloth and dried blood. She cut that, too, bearing his shoulder. It was a ragged tear, a bullet graze that had gouged a deep channel through the muscle. It was dirty, filled with bits of wool and trail dust. He hissed as the cold air hit the raw flesh. Willa went to her small back room and returned with a bottle of whiskey. Medicinal, she told herself, though she sometimes took a sip on the coldest nights. And her sewing kit, not the delicate silk threads, but the heavy-gauge linen thread and the thickest needle she owned. She knelt beside him. He was watching her, his eyes clearer now, filled with a desperate, hunted look she knew too well. "You came back," he whispered, his voice cracking. She ignored him. She uncorked the whiskey. "Bite on this." She tore a strip of clean cotton and handed it to him. He pushed it away. "Willa, She did not wait. She poured the whiskey directly into the wound. Levi roared, a choked, strangled sound, arching off the floor. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, his fingers biting down like a steel trap. Willa did not flinch. She met his gaze, her own eyes as cold and hard as the wind outside. "I told you it would hurt. Now stay still, or I will put this needle through your hand instead of your shoulder." He stared at her, breathing in ragged gasps. He saw the woman she had become. The girl was gone. In her place was this stranger with hard eyes and a mouth set in a permanent line of grief. He slowly released his grip on her wrist. She threaded the needle. She did not bother to wipe the sweat and grime from his skin. She just began to sew. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the howl of the wind and the sharp intake of Levi's breath each time the needle pierced his skin. She worked quickly, her stitches small and tight, just as she would on a fine silk dress. She was a professional. This was just another piece of damaged goods that needed mending. She focused on the work, on the pull of the thread, the pucker of the skin. She would not look at his face. She would not think about the man attached to the wound. He was a task, nothing more. He bore it. He did not make another sound. He just watched her, his eyes burning with an intensity that she could feel on her skin. When she was finished, she tied off the thread and cut it with a snap. She bandaged the wound with strips of clean linen, her movements efficient and impersonal. She sat back on her heels. It was done. "Willa," he said again. His voice was a rasp. "You shouldn't have come here." She began gathering her things, wiping the blood from her shears. "I didn't have a choice. You always have a choice. Levi." She stood up, her back to him. "You made yours 6 years ago. You left me here to rot." "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that." She turned, her face a mask of controlled fury. "Do you know what you did? Do you have any idea what happened after you rode out? They called my father a traitor. They took his job. They ran us out. My mother died in the dirt, and my father died wishing he had never even heard your name." He flinched, the words hitting him harder than the whiskey had. He tried to push himself up on his good elbow, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Willa, I never knew. I swear, I never knew. I left to protect you. They would have hung me. They would have hurt you for helping me." "And what do you call this?" she snapped, gesturing around the cold, empty shop. "This is the protection you gave me? I am an outcast. I have nothing. I have no one. All because I was stupid enough to believe you." She was shaking now, the cold rage finally breaking through the ice. "I should have let you bleed out. I should have turned you over to the sheriff." "Why didn't you?" he whispered. The question hung in the air between them. She had no answer for it. She stared at him. This man who was the source of all her pain, and the anger coexisted with a terrible, pulling ache deep in her chest. She hated him for leaving her, and, God help her, she still wanted him. The realization made her feel sick. "Get some sleep," she said, her voice hollow. She threw an old wool blanket at him. It landed on his chest. "You can stay on the floor. In the morning, if the storm breaks, you're gone." "Willa, please!" He reached for her, his hand grasping at the air. "I tried to go somewhere else. I promise, I tried, but the posse from Cheyenne, they'll be looking for me. I'm hurt. I had nowhere else. You're the only one I could come to." His words were a confession, a burden he had just laid squarely back at her feet. 6 years, and he had brought his trouble right back to her door. She looked away from the desperation in his eyes. Turning to the window, the world outside was gone. It was no longer dark. It was solid white. The snow was coming down so thick she could not see the street, could not see the building across from her. The wind screamed, a living thing, clawing at the little shop. It was not just a storm. It was a blizzard, the kind that could last for days. Willa closed her eyes, resting her forehead against the freezing glass. He was not leaving in the morning. He was not leaving tomorrow, or the day after. He was trapped, and she was trapped with him. For 2 days, Levi was more a ghost than a man. The wound, poisoned by the dirty wool and trail grit, festered. He burned with fever, lost in a land of fractured memories and dry-throated thirst. Willa worked with a grim, detached efficiency. She kept him in the small, windowless storage room behind the workshop, a space that smelled of old fabric bolts and mice. She had dragged her own narrow cot in there for him, a sacrifice that infuriated her. She spent the nights on a pile of rags and unsold blankets near the stove, sleeping in short, angry bursts. She told him the rules on the first morning, when his eyes were clear for a brief moment. "You are not here," she said, her voice a low rasp, holding a cup of willow bark tea to his chapped lips. "You do not speak. You do not move from this room. If I have to go out, you do not breathe. If anyone comes to that door, you will be silent, even if it's the sheriff putting a bullet through it. If you make a single sound, I will put you out in the snow myself. Do you understand me?" He nodded, the motion pained. He drank the bitter tea and slipped back into the fever. Willa became a creature of two worlds. In the workshop, she sat at her machine, the rhythmic thump, clack, a comfort, a sound of normalcy. She mended shirts, patched trousers, and worked on a new dress for the saloon girl, Sadie, one of the few people who still spoke to her with any kindness. But every hour, she would stop, her hands freezing over the fabric. She would listen. Was he breathing? Was he dying? She would rise, her legs stiff, and enter the back room. She would bathe his face with snow melt, the cold water making him shudder. She would unwrap the bandages, clean the angry red lines of her own stitching, and bind him up again. His skin was hot. He was broad-chested, even thinned by the trail, and touching him was a trial. Her fingers, so sure on silk and wool, trembled against his skin. She remembered this body. She remembered it young and whole, strong and warm against hers in a hayloft, smelling of sunshine and soap. Now it was scarred, feverish, and a mortal danger. She hated him for being weak. She hated him for making her strong. By the third day, the wind died. The world was muffled, buried in 4 feet of packed snow. The silence was heavier than the storm had been. Scar Hollow began to dig itself out. Willa knew she could not wait. Her flour sack was nearly empty. The kerosene for her lantern was low. She had a man to feed, a thought that brought a fresh wave of resentment. She bundled herself in her father's old coat, the wool thin at the elbows, and pulled a shawl over her head. "I am going out," she said, standing in the doorway of the storage room. Levi's fever had broken in the night. His eyes were clear, hollowed out by pain and exhaustion. But they were his. He was sitting up, the blanket pooled around his waist. He looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "Willa," he started. "Do not," she cut him off. "Not a word, not a sound." She left, bolting the front door of the shop, a gesture that was purely for show. The town was a maze of white canyons. The main street was barely a path, wide enough for a single wagon, shoveled clear by the men from the livery and the saloon. The air was blindingly bright, the snow reflecting a cold, merciless sun. Walking into Henderson's dry goods was like walking from a tomb into a noisy kitchen. The stove in the center roared. The place was crowded. Men in heavy coats clustered by the Cracker Barrel, their voices low. Mrs. Abernathy, the banker's wife, was at the counter with 2 other women, her voice a sharp, nasal complaint. When Willa entered, the conversations did not stop, but they faltered. A space cleared around her, as if she carried a chill worse than the one outside. She kept her eyes down, her face hidden by the shawl. She went to the back, picked up a 20-pound sack of flour, a tin of kerosene, and a small sack of beans. She would do without coffee. "That all for you, Miss Monroe?" "Mr. Henderson asked, his voice polite but distant. He would not meet her gaze. "Yes, thank you, Mr. "That storm was a fright," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice loud enough to carry. She was speaking to her friends, but the words were aimed at Willa. "A judgment, if you ask me. This town has become far too lenient, letting all manner of folk stay." Willa's back stiffened. She placed her items on the counter, her hands steady. The shop door opened, its bell jingling, letting in a swirl of cold air. Sheriff Brody stamped the snow from his boots. He was a thick, graying man who had taken the post 3 years ago. He was fair, but he had no tolerance for disorder. "Ladies, Henderson." He nodded, his eyes sweeping the store. They landed on Willa. "Miss Monroe, good to see you're not buried in—" "Sheriff," Willa murmured. "Just buying my supplies?" "Good, good." He moved closer to the stove, warming his hands. "Heard a rumor you might have seen something before the storm hit." Willa's heart stopped. She could feel every eye in the store on her. "I don't know what you mean, Sheriff." Man from the livery thought he saw a stranger ride in at dusk, just before the snow got thick, riding a lame buckskin. Man was slumped over, looked hurt, rode toward your end of town. Willa focused on the counter, on the brown paper package of beans. "I saw no one. Sheriff, I was inside, getting ready for the storm. I saw nothing." "Nothing at all." Brody's voice was casual, but his eyes were not. "That's a shame. A man hurt that bad, out in that blizzard. Well, we'll probably find him in the spring." He sighed. "Just seems odd, a man vanishing into thin air." "Perhaps he found shelter," Willa said, her voice tight. "Perhaps," Brody agreed. "But there ain't much shelter at your end of town. Just you, Miss Monroe." The insinuation was clear. Just the outlaw's friend. Willa paid Mr. Henderson, her fingers clumsy with the coins. "If you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She picked up her flour sack. It was heavy, but she refused to show weakness, refused to ask for help. She walked out of the store, her spine rigid, the silence of the room following her into the street. When she got back to the shop, she was shaking, not from the cold, but from rage. She slammed the door, bolted it, and dropped the sack to the floor. She leaned against the door, her eyes closed, breathing hard. "Willa?" Levi's voice from the back room shattered her control. "I told you to be silent," she hissed, tearing off her shawl. "I heard you come in. I heard the door. Was someone with you?" He was standing in the doorway of the back room, dressed in his own trousers and the clean shirt she had left for him. He was pale, leaning against the jamb for support, but he was on his feet. "What are you doing up? Get back on that cot." "Who was it? Willa?" "It was the sheriff," she snapped, stalking past him to shove the kerosene tin onto a shelf. "He's asking questions. The whole town is. They're looking for you. They think you're dead in the snow. And God help me, I wish you were." The words were cruel, but she was too angry to care. "He knows I'm here." "He suspects. They always suspect me. For 6 years. I have been the town's stray dog, the one they kick when they're in a foul mood. And you just brought it all back." She turned on him, her fists clenched. "You have to go." "Go where?" He gestured weakly to the window, now a solid pane of white ice. "There is nowhere. Willa, you know it. I'll die in an hour out there." "That is not my concern. It stopped being my concern 6 years ago when you rode away and left me to face them." She was breathing hard, the memories she had held at bay for 3 days flooding back. The memory of the promise that had cost her everything. "You promised me," she whispered, the rage dissolving into a pain so sharp it stole her breath. "You stood in my father's barn, and you kissed me, and you promised you would come back." "I know," he said, his voice rough. "No, you don't know. You don't know anything." She advanced on him, and he instinctively straightened, moving away from the door jamb. "I waited. Every day for a year. I watched that road. Every time a rider came in, my heart would stop, and every time, it wasn't you." "Willa, I couldn't." "You could have written. You could have sent word, but you just vanished. And they came for my father. They called him a liar. They said he aided a fugitive. They took his name. They took his pride. He had to beg Mr. Abernathy, beg him, not to seize this shop. And do you know why? Because he believed you, too. He believed you were a good man. He believed you'd come back and clear his name." She struck the wall beside his head, her hand hitting the cold wood with a dull thud. "My father died in a sod house in Nebraska. He died in disgrace. Levi, he died believing the man he trusted had betrayed him. He died because of you." Levi's face was ashen. He had no defense against this. "I didn't know," he said, the words hollow. "That's what you said before. It's all you know how to say." "It's the truth," he shot back, his voice rising with a sudden, desperate strength. "What was I supposed to do? Ride back in here with a posse on my tail? The mayor's family wanted me dead. They put a price on my head. I couldn't go home. I couldn't write. A letter would have led them right to you, right to your father. I left to protect you. I rode until my horse died. I joined a cattle drive to Texas. I did things. I've spent 6 years with men who would shoot you for your boots. I did it all so they would never, ever find the trail back to you." He was breathing hard. His good hand clenched. "I never stopped thinking about you, not for one day. Every damn night. I saw your face." His words were a confession, but to Willa, they were salt on the wound. They were just more excuses, more justifications for her pain. "And what about me?" she cried. "Did you think of me? What did you think I was doing? Waiting, mending your shirts? You think you're the only one who had to survive? I stayed. I faced them. I buried my parents. I learned to be alone. I learned to hear them whisper when I walked down the street. I learned to be nothing. You ran. I stayed." He looked at her, his eyes tracing the hard lines of her face. the exhaustion she could not hide. He saw the strength she mistook for emptiness. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet now. "You stayed. You always were. You're the bravest person I've ever known. Willa, you're braver than I ever was." It was not pity, it was not an excuse. It was the truth, and it was the one thing she could not bear to hear. She slapped him. The sound was sharp, shocking in the cold room. Her handprint flared red on his pale cheek. It was a sudden, violent release of 6 years of grief and anger and unbearable, suffocating loneliness. Levi did not flinch. He did not raise a hand. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain that had nothing to do with her hand. Willa stared at him, horrified at what she had done. The strength that had held her up for so long crumbled. A single sob, a dry, ragged sound, tore from her chest. She turned, stumbling away from him, and fled. She ran to the back door, the one he had fallen through, and wrenched it open. She fell out into the snow, gulping at the frigid air. The alley behind the shop was a white cocoon, silent and still. She sank to her knees in a snowdrift, wrapped her arms around herself, and finally, after 6 years, she broke. She wept. She cried for her father's good name. She cried for her mother's lost home. She cried for the girl she had been, the girl who believed in promises. She cried until her throat was raw and her tears froze on her cheeks. She did not know how long she knelt there. The cold seeped into her, numbing her. She was so tired. It would be so easy to just lie down, to let the snow cover her, to finally rest. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, expecting the sheriff, expecting the whole town. It was Levi. He was unsteady, his breath pluming in the air. But he was there. He had grabbed his own ruined coat from a peg by the door. Without a word, he stepped into the drift behind her. He wrapped the heavy wool coat around her shoulders, pulling it tight. Willa flinched, ready to fight, to pull away. But she had nothing left. She was empty. He did not try to pull her up. He did not speak. He just stood there, shielding her from the wind, his coat a heavy, warm weight on her back. And she, for the first time in 6 years, did not pull away. She leaned back against his legs, a silent admission of defeat, and let him shelter her. They stayed like that for a long time, the only two people in a world of white. Finally, her sobs quieted. The shivering returned, a deep, bone-rattling cold. "You'll freeze," he said, his voice low. She nodded, her face buried in her hands. She let him help her up. His grip on her arm was tight, his hand still strong. He guided her back inside, kicking the door shut against the encroaching twilight. The workshop was almost dark. The only light came from the red glow of the stove's grate. The tension from the argument was gone, replaced by something heavier, something raw and exposed. They had seen the worst of each other. She stood by the stove, rubbing her arms, her back to him. She could feel him standing right behind her. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, even through his sickness. "Willa," he said. She turned. He was looking at her, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as a man. His eyes were dark, searching. He saw the ice on her eyelashes. He saw the rawness of her skin. He saw the woman who had slapped him and the girl who had cried in the snow. He raised his good hand, slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal. He did not touch her face. He touched her hair, his fingers brushing a frozen strand back from her cheek. It was too much. The anger, the grief, the proximity, the sudden, terrible tenderness, desire, hot and sharp, burned through her. It was not love. It was a desperate, primal need to feel something other than cold and lonely. He must have seen it in her eyes. He stepped closer. He lowered his head, and she did not move. She did not breathe. He kissed her. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of the boy in the barn. This was slow, hesitant, and devastating. It was a question. His lips were chapped, cold from the outside air, but they were firm. He tasted of willow bark and the storm. Willa's hands came up, gripping his shirt, clinging to him. She kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her 6 years of solitude into it. It was a single, desperate, hungry kiss, a collision of past and present. It lasted only a moment. It lasted a lifetime. She was the one who broke it. She pushed against his chest, stumbling back, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She stared at him, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. He took a step toward her, his hand outstretched. "Willa, No," she whispered, holding up a hand. She would not let this happen. She would not be that girl again. She turned and walked away from him, to the far side of the room, her heart hammering a painful, broken rhythm. She stopped, her back to him, her voice shaking. "Don't make me believe in you again." The kiss hung in the air between them, more substantial than the blizzard, more dangerous than the man who had delivered it. After Willa's whispered warning, she had retreated to her side of the room, and he to his. The unspoken truce was shattered. In its place was a fragile, humming tension that neither knew how to navigate. The storm, as if sensing their turmoil, did not break. It held for another day, and then another. The snow fell. It was not a violent, driving wind, but a thick, suffocating, relentless curtain of white that erased the world. Scar Hollow ceased to exist. There was only the shop, only the two of them, trapped in a space no larger than a horse stall. They lived by a new, unspoken set of rules. They were two ghosts haunting the same small house, each performing their duties with a rigid, desperate focus. Willa worked. It was her anchor. She rose before the gray light of morning, stoked the stove, and then sat at her machine. The thump, clack was the only clock they had, the only proof that time was moving. She sewed furiously, finishing Mrs. Abernathy's skirt, mending a canvas tarp for the livery, and starting on Sadie's dress. She sewed as if her life depended on the stitches. And in a way, it did. It was the only thing that kept her from looking at him. Levi healed. His body, finally given rest and warmth, began to knit itself back together. The fever was gone, leaving him weak but clear-headed. He was confined to the small cot in the storage room. He was a prisoner of the weather, of his own weakness, and of her. They did not speak of the kiss. They did not speak of the past. They spoke of fuel and food. "The wood is low," she would say, her back to him, her eyes on the small pile near the stove. "I can break up that old chair," he would offer, his voice still rough. "No, it's for a customer." They ate in shifts. She would prepare a thin broth or a small piece of bread, place it on a stool by the storage room door, and walk away. She would not watch him eat. She ate her own portion standing by the frosted window, staring at the wall of white outside. They slept under the same roof, separated by only a thin wall and a chasm of 6 years. She lay on her pile of rags and blankets, the wool scratching her cheek. She would lie awake, every muscle tense, listening. She heard every time he shifted on the cot, every muffled cough, every sigh that the darkness pulled from him. She knew he was awake, too. They were like two long-lost lovers, lying back to back, their hearts beating in the same small space. Yet they had never been further apart. The silence was the worst part. It was thick and heavy, filled with everything they had not said, every accusation, every apology, every desperate, hungry memory. On the 5th day, the silence finally broke. Willa was changing his bandage. It had become a ritual. The one time of day she was forced to touch him. She had learned to be clinical, her movements quick and impersonal. But the wound was healing. The angry red had faded. Her stitches were holding. It was healthy pink skin, a testament to her care. He was sitting on the edge of the cot. She knelt before him, unwrapping the linen. "You have a good hand," he said, his voice quiet. Better than any sawbones I've met." She did not look up. She dabbed at the healing flesh with a cloth dipped in whiskey. He did not wince. "I've had practice. Mending torn things is my trade." The bitterness in her voice was plain. He waited until she had finished cleaning the wound, as she began to wrap the new, clean linen. His good hand came up and rested on hers, not to stop her, just to hold it. His skin was warm. Willa froze. She stared at his hand covering hers, his fingers long and calloused, resting against the back of her own chapped, needle-pricked fingers. She tried to pull away. "Don't," he whispered. "Let go of my hand, Levi. Please, just for a minute." He did not grip her. He just rested there. Willa, I need you to know." She looked up, her eyes meeting his. The anger she had relied on for days was gone, worn down by exhaustion and proximity. There was only a great, aching sadness. "You told me what happened," he said, his voice low, his gaze locked on hers. "To your father, but you didn't tell me all of it." She looked away. "I told you enough. You said he died in disgrace. You said they ran you out." "Yes." "But you're still here, in his shop. How?" Willa's throat tightened. She had not spoken of this to a living soul. She had buried it, deep and cold. But his hand was on hers, a simple, human touch she had been denied for so long. And the words just came. "They didn't just run us out," she said, her voice hollow, her eyes fixed on a bolt of gray wool in the corner. "They held a town meeting, in the saloon. They talked about justice. They talked about tar and feathers. And then someone, I think it was the mayor's brother, said that wasn't enough. He said aiding a fugitive was the same as being one. He said my father deserved to hang." Levi's hand tightened on hers, his knuckles white. "Willa, no." "They were drunk. They were angry. They loved the mayor's nephew. And you had shamed him. They wanted blood. They formed a mob." She was not crying. Her voice was flat, recounting a story she had memorized by heart. "They came here. They dragged him out of the house. My mother was screaming. They had a rope. They threw it over the sign beam right out front." She took a shaky breath. I ran to them. I got on my knees. In the mud, I got on my knees in front of Mr. Abernathy, in front of the sheriff. I begged them. I told them my father was a simple man, that he was soft-hearted, that he didn't know any better, that I was the one, that I had fooled him." She looked at Levi, her eyes burning, but still dry. "I told them he was a fool, and I was a liar. I shamed him. I shamed myself. I begged them not to make my mother a widow over a stupid boy's fight." She finally pulled her hand from his, crawling back, needing the space. "Mr. Abernathy, the banker." He stopped it. Not out of kindness. He said a hanging would bring federal marshals. And that was bad for business. He said disgrace was enough. They gave us 48 hours to be out of town. We lost the house. We lost everything. But my father, he had a lien on this shop, a private one with Abernathy. He convinced him to let me keep it, in exchange for my father never setting foot in this territory again. She wrapped her arms around herself. "So I came back, after they were gone. I came back, alone. I came back to this empty shop, and I started sewing. I've been here ever enduring every whisper, every stare, every woman who looks at me like I'm dirt, but still brings me her mending because she knows I'm the best. I have no family. Levi, I have no friends. I have this shop. I have the work. That is all you left me." The confession hung in the air. He had no words. "I'm sorry" was a useless, childish sound. He looked at his hands. He looked at the woman who had knelt in the mud to save her father from his mistake. He finally stood up from the cot, his legs unsteady, but he stood. He was taller than her, and he felt the imbalance of it. She, who had been so strong, looked small and broken. The cause of it, was the one standing whole. "You think I ran," he said, his voice thick. "And you're right. I did. I was 19, and I was terrified, and I ran. But you think I was free." He walked past her, into the main room. It was the first time he had left the storage area. He went to the window, scraping a small patch of ice away with his fingernail, staring at the blinding white. "I told you I was hunted. That was the truth. But it wasn't just them. I was hunted by you." She stayed in the doorway, watching him. "What are you talking about?" "For the first year, I just ran. I rode south. I lived on rabbits and cold streams. I slept with my gun in my hand. But after a while, the trail went cold. I was safe. I could have, I don't know, started over. I was in Texas. No one knew me." He turned to face her. The light from the white window was harsh, illuminating the new lines on his face, the scars she hadn't seen. "But I couldn't. Every time I looked at a decent woman, I saw you. Every time I heard someone laugh, I heard you. I was poison. I tried to become someone else. I tried to become hard. Someone who didn't feel. Someone unloving." He looked down at his hands. "I rode with men, bad men. Men who would kill a man for snoring. I watched them do things I can't ever wash off. I drank. I fought. I became the thing they all accused me of being. I became a killer. Willa." The confession was torn from him. I stood by while they robbed a stage. I told myself it was just cargo. But there were people. They were scared. And I just held the horses. I did it. And I hated myself. I did everything I could to burn the memory of you out of my head. To burn that decent boy you knew. I tried to kill him." He looked up, and his eyes were raw. "But I couldn't. No matter how hard I got, no matter how far I rode, I would close my eyes, and I would see you in your father's barn, handing me the reins. Your eyes, they were so scared, but you were so brave. You never left me. Not for a single night, not for 6 years." He stepped toward her, his voice dropping. "I didn't come back here to hide. Willa, not really. I came back here because I couldn't stay away anymore. I had to see if you were still you. I had to know if the one good thing I ever had was still in the world." He had matched her confession with his own. They were two exposed nerves, standing in the cold light. The anger was gone. The resentment was gone. All that was left was the shared, crushing weight of their past. She did not move. She just stared at him, seeing the broken man behind the ghost. The days that followed were different. The tension did not disappear, but it changed. It was no longer the sharp edge of anger. It was the heavy, humming pull of a shared secret. They began to talk, not of the past, but of small things. She taught him how to thread the needle on the sewing machine when her fingers cramped. He showed her how to properly bank the fire in the stove so it would last through the night. He would sit on the stool in the doorway of the storage room, his shoulder healing, and just watch her. He watched her hands, how they moved over the fabric, sure and swift. He watched the way she bit her lip when she was concentrating on a difficult stitch. He watched the firelight catch the strands of her hair she had tucked behind her ear. She was aware of his eyes. She felt his gaze like a physical touch, a warmth on her skin. It made her clumsy. Her fingers, which had never failed her, would tremble. She would drop her shears. "You're staring," she said one afternoon, not looking up from the lace she was sewing onto Sadie's dress. "I'm watching," he corrected. "It's peaceful. The sound." "It's work," she said. "You're good at it. You make it look easy." "It's not. It's mathematics. It's fractions and angles." "It's beautiful," he said, his voice soft. She stopped sewing. The machine whined to a halt. She looked at him. The longing that she had been fighting, the terrible, stupid, youthful want, was back. It simmered between them, thicker than the stew she had made for supper. They were growing closer. The walls of the shop were pressing in, and the walls around their hearts were crumbling with them. That night, The 8th night, the longing became unbearable. The storm had not broken, but it had quieted. The wind was a low moan instead of a scream. The shop was dark, lit only by the one lantern she kept on her work table, and the flickering red cracks of the stove. Willa was tired. She had been sewing since dawn, her shoulders aching. She had stood up to stretch, her back to Levi. He was sitting at the small table where she usually ate, cleaning his gun, a task he performed with a slow, meticulous care that she found both fascinating and terrifying. She sighed, a sound of pure, bone-deep exhaustion. She pressed her hands into the small of her back. He stopped his work. The soft snick of the oiled rag on steel ceased. "You should rest," he said. "I will." But she didn't move. He stood up. The small room suddenly felt crowded. He walked over to her, stopping just behind her. She could feel his body heat. She closed her eyes. "Willa?" She turned, slowly. She was so tired of fighting. He was looking at her, and his eyes were dark with a hunger that matched her own. All the confessions, all the shared grief, had only been kindling. This was the spark. He had not touched her since the kiss. He did not touch her now. He just looked at her, his gaze a raw plea. "Don't," she whispered, but the word had no strength. "I can't," he breathed. He moved, faster than she thought his wounded body could. He didn't press her against the wall. He simply surrounded her. One hand, his good one, came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers sinking into her hair, pulling the pins loose. The other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He kissed her like a man starved. It was not the hesitant, questioning kiss of the other night. This was a claim. It was 6 years of loneliness, of regret, of picturing her face in dusty, bloody saloons. It was desperate. He kissed her, and she did not melt. She ignited. She met his hunger with her own. Her hands gripped his shirt, then his shoulders, her nails digging in. She forgot his wound. She forgot the town. She forgot her grief. There was only this, the taste of him, the solid, real, warm presence of him. He kissed her neck, his beard rough against her skin, and a sound, half sob, half moan, escaped her. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, their mouths never parting. He carried her the 2 steps to her makeshift bed, the pile of blankets and rags by the stove, and they sank into it. They did not speak. There was no need for words. This was a language they both knew. His hands were urgent, pulling at the buttons of her plain wool dress. Her fingers were clumsy, fumbling with the buckle of his belt. It was not gentle. It was a frantic, desperate need to erase the 6 years, to be skin against skin. He pulled her dress down, his lips following the line of her collarbone. She shivered, arching against him. The lantern light flickered, casting their shadows, huge and dancing, on the wall. He stopped, just for a second. He was poised above her, his face taut with a mixture of desire and a pain that had nothing to do with his shoulder. He looked down at her, her hair spilling over the rough blankets, her dress open, her eyes wide and dark in the firelight. "Willa," he whispered, a prayer. And then the urgency broke, replaced by something else, a profound, aching tenderness. He touched her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. He was a man reverent. This was not a taking. It was a homecoming. He moved slowly, carefully, his body heavy and warm. When he finally pressed into her, she gasped, her eyes closing. It was a perfect, aching relief, a feeling she had forgotten existed. He moved with a slow, deliberate rhythm, a rhythm that was both reverent and urgent. He was worshiping her, the woman who had survived him. He was memorizing her with his body, and she met his every move, clinging to him, her own body reawaken. In the soft flicker of the lantern light, with the snow falling silently outside, They found the piece of themselves they had both lost. Afterward, they lay tangled in the blankets, their bodies slick and warm. The silence returned. But it was different. It was full, not empty. Willa lay with her head on his chest, her ear over his heart. She listened to the strong, steady beat. He held her, his good arm wrapped tightly around her, his face buried in her hair. She had not felt safe in 6 years. But as the warmth seeped back into her limbs, the fear returned. Not the fear of the town, but the fear of this feeling, the fear of him. She stirred, her voice small, muffled against his skin. She was trembling. "Will you leave again?" Levi's answer was a low rumble in his chest, a vibration against her ear. "Never." He held her in the pre-dawn cold. The word a promise, a brand. It was the first promise he had made her in 6 years that she believed. But as the gray light of morning crept through the frosted glass, the word hung in the air, a challenge to the world outside. The storm broke on the 9th day. It did not end with grace, but with a great, heavy sigh. The wind died, and the thick, suffocating silence of the snowbound shop was replaced by the sudden, sharp sound of dripping water. The thaw had begun. They dressed in silence, the intimacy of the night before settling around them like a new, fragile skin. He was no longer just a wounded man she was hiding. He was the man who had slept in her arms. And the shop was no longer a fortress. It was a trap. "You're stronger," she said, looking at his shoulder. The wound was a puckered, healing line. "Thanks to you." He moved his arm, testing it. The stiffness was nearly gone. He was whole. He was a danger. "I have to go out," she said, her voice tight. "The flour is gone. The kerosene is nearly out. We can't hide forever." "Willa, no, it's too soon. Brody is suspicious." "And we'll starve if I don't," she countered, her voice sharp. "We ate the last of the beans this morning. You're a healing man. You need to eat." She would not be argued with. She bundled herself in the old coat. But this time, before she left, she turned. He was standing by the stove, his face grim, his hand resting near the pistol he had meticulously cleaned. She walked to him, stood on her toes, and kissed him. It was a quick, hard press of her lips, a kiss of possession, not passion. "Be silent, be smart. I'll be back in an hour." She slipped out the front door into a world reborn in blinding white. The town was struggling to life. Men were on the boardwalks, shoveling paths through snow that was waist-deep in places. Steam rose from the livery, and the saloon doors were thrown open, the sound of a tinny piano already spilling out. Willa kept her head down. She felt exposed, as if her night with Levi was painted on her face. Every person she passed seemed to be staring at her, their eyes accusing. She entered Henderson's Dry Goods, the bell over the door sounding unnaturally loud. The store was empty, save for Mr. Henderson, who was sweeping meltwater toward the door. "Miss Monroe," he said, his voice flat. Mr. Henderson, I need flour and kerosene." As he moved to the back, the saloon doors across the street swung open, and a man stepped out. Willa, watching through Henderson's front window, froze. He was not from Scar Hollow. He was tall and thin as a whip, dressed in a black duster that was too light for the weather. He had a narrow face, pale eyes, and a long, drooping mustache. He moved with a lazy, coiled energy, his gaze sweeping the street. He looked, Willa thought, like a vulture that had been starved. He ambled over to two men who were shoveling. He spoke to them, his head tilted. One of the men pointed. He pointed toward the south end of town, toward her shop. "That'll be $3.50. "Mr. Henderson said at her elbow. Willa jumped, her heart hammering. She fumbled with her coin purse, her eyes still locked on the stranger. He was asking questions. "Who is that man?" she asked, trying to keep her voice level. Henderson glanced out the window. Rode in this morning, just as the path was cleared. Named Silas Vane. He's in from Cheyenne. Been at the saloon since sunup, buying drinks and asking questions. What kind of questions? Henderson shrugged, bagging her flour. Asking about the storm, asking if any strangers came through before it hit. Specifically, he's asking about a man riding a lame buckskin, a man with a bad shoulder wound. Willa's blood turned to ice. She paid, her hands shaking. Thank you, Mr. Henderson. She grabbed her supplies and fled the store. She did not run, but every step was an agony of restraint. She felt Vane's pale eyes on her back, a physical weight. She made it to her shop, fumbled with the key, and slammed the door behind her, bolting it. Levi was on his feet instantly. What is it? You're white as a sheet. He's here, she gasped, dropping the sack of flour. A man, Silas Vane. He's from Cheyenne. He's at the saloon, asking about you, asking about the buckskin, the wound. He knows you came this way. Levi did not panic. His face went cold and still. He had been expecting this. Silas, I should have known. He's a tracker, part of the old posse. He's not a man who gives up. What is he, a bounty hunter? Worse, he enjoys the work. Levi moved to the window, peering through a small patch she had cleared in the frost. He won't just go to the sheriff. He'll look for me himself. He wants the money. All of it. What do we do? She whispered. We wait, he said, his voice grim. They did not have to wait long. The gossip mill, silent during the storm, began to grind. That evening, as dusk painted the snow blue, Willa was seen. She was standing near her own front window, the lantern lit behind her, casting her in sharp silhouette. She was arguing with someone. Mrs. Henderson, walking home, saw her. She saw Willa Monroe, the town recluse, gesturing wildly, her face pale with fright. She was talking to a man's shadow, tall and broad, moved behind her. By the next morning, the rumor was wildfire. Willa Monroe is hiding a man. She's had him in there since the storm. It's the wounded rider, the one Sheriff Brody was asking about. The sheriff heard it before noon. He was not a man who enjoyed rumors, but this one confirmed his suspicions. He walked down the muddy, snow-packed street, his boots heavy, and knocked on Willa's door. Open up, Miss Monroe. It's Sheriff Brody. Willa looked at Levi, her eyes wide with terror. Levi put a finger to his lips. He moved silently into the back room, his gun in his hand. Willa opened the door a crack. Sheriff, can I help you? Brody pushed the door open, forcing her to step back. He was not unkind, but he was firm. He stepped inside, his hat in his hands, but his eyes were sharp. They swept the small room. Miss Monroe, I'm going to ask you one more time. Are you alone in here? I am? She lied, her voice thin. Brody's gaze fell on the table. 2 tin cups sat there, one of them stained with a trace of coffee. His eyes moved to the stove. Levi's ruined duster, the one she had mended, was hanging on a peg, drying. That's a man's coat, Miss Monroe. It's my father's, she said, the lie tasting like ash. Your father's been dead for 4 years. Brody sighed, his gaze softening for just a moment. Willa, the whole town is talking, and there's a new man in town, a nasty piece of work named Vane. He's looking for a fugitive. If you are harboring the man he's looking for, you are in a world of trouble. You're obstructing justice. You're an accomplice. I don't know any man named Vane, she said. Brody looked at her, his patience wearing thin. I'm not your enemy, girl, but I can't protect you if you lie to me. Whoever's in that back room, you tell him to turn himself in. It's his only chance. He put his hat on and turned to leave. I'll be back, and I'll have a warrant. When the door closed, Willa sagged against it. Levi emerged from the back room, his face a mask of fury. He knows it's over. He's giving us a choice. Levi, he's giving you a choice. Turn yourself in. And hang? Levi scoffed. Not for a fight I didn't start. Not after 6 years. Before she could argue, there was another knock. Not the heavy, official knock of the sheriff. This was a light, impatient rap. Willa, her nerves shattered, looked at Levi. He shook his head, motioning for her to stay silent. The knock came again, then a voice. Miss Monroe, I know you're in there. I am not the sheriff. I suggest you open this door. It was the voice of Mr. Abernathy, the banker. Willa opened the door. Levi was hidden again, but this time he was pressed against the wall right beside the doorway. Abernathy did not enter. He stood on her boardwalk, his expensive wool coat immaculate. He was a small, precise man with eyes like chips of slate. He had been the one to grant her father mercy. He had been the one to hold the note on her shop ever since. Mr. Abernathy. Willa. He never called her Miss Monroe when he was displeased. The town is buzzing. It seems you have forgotten your place. I don't know what you mean. Do not play the fool with me, he snapped, his voice low and cold. I am the only reason you are not destitute. I am the only reason this hovel was not seized for your father's debts. I allowed you to stay out of a sense of civic duty, believing you would live a quiet, penitent life. He stepped closer, his voice dropping so only she could hear. Now, I hear you are harboring a man, the same kind of man you helped before, a killer. I remember, Willa, I remember you on your knees in the mud, begging for your father's life. I remember what happens when you side with a killer. You brought ruin to your family. Now you are bringing it on yourself. He's not... I do not care who he is, Abernathy hissed. You are a blight on this town, just as your father was. I hold the note on this property. It is past due. I have been lenient, but my leniency is at an end. You will have that man, whoever he is, out of my town by sundown, or I will have the sheriff throw you both out, and I will seize this property. You will be homeless. You will be ruined. Do you understand me? The threat was absolute. It was not just her reputation. It was her home. It was the last piece of her father. She stared at him, her hatred a cold, hard stone in her chest. Yes, Mr. Abernathy, I understand perfectly. She shut the door in his face. She turned, leaning against the wood, her whole body shaking with a white-hot, silent rage. Levi stepped out. He had heard every word. That's it, Levi said. His voice was final. He grabbed his coat from the peg. He shoved his few belongings into his mended saddlebags. We're leaving. Tonight, as soon as it's dark. Willa just stared at him. Did you hear me? Willa, pack your things. Whatever you can carry. We'll take my horse. We'll go north, to Oregon. Somewhere no one knows us. Abernathy can have this cursed town. No. The word was quiet, but it stopped him cold. He turned, the saddlebag in his hand. What did you say? No. She walked away from the door, toward the center of the room. She stood over the place where he had bled, the place where they had made love. Willa, this is not a discussion, Levi said, his voice tight with urgency. Abernathy will ruin you, Brody will arrest you, and Silas Vane will kill me. We have to run. I am not running. She turned to face him. Her fear was gone, replaced by something he had never seen in her, a terrible, blazing calm. I have been running for 6 years. Levi, I've been hiding in this shop, hiding from their whispers, hiding from my own life. I did it because I was alone. I did it because you left me. I am not leaving you. I am trying to save you. I'm taking you with me. It is the same thing, she cried, her voice finally breaking. You are asking me to run, to prove them all right, to prove Abernathy right, that I am a coward, that I am just a killer's woman who has to flee in the dark. You are asking me to give up the only thing I have left in this world, the one thing my father died to give me. And I will not. Willa, be reasonable. It's just a building. It is not just a building, she shouted. It is my life. It is my name. It is the only place on earth that is mine. I won't be abandoned again. Levi, not by them, and not by you. I told you I wouldn't run. I would rather face the fire. I would rather stand here and let them burn it down around me than spend one more day of my life as a coward. He stared at her, stunned. The girl he had left was gone. The woman she had become was more formidable than any gunman he had ever known. She was right. He was asking her to be weak, because he was afraid. "All right," he said, his voice dropping. He dropped the saddlebag. "We don't run, but we don't hide either." He walked to his pistol, which was on the table. He checked the cylinder. "Silas is the immediate threat. He's the wolf at the door. I have to face him. I'll draw him out, into the street. Away from you, away from the shop." Willa's newfound strength faltered. "No, Levi, please. That's what started this. The violence. You brought it to my door 6 years ago, and you brought it back. I cannot have blood on my doorstep. Not again. Please, let's just wait. Let the sheriff handle him. Brody said he was a problem. Maybe he'll run him out." "A man like Silas doesn't get run out," Levi said, his voice grim as he slotted a bullet into the chamber. "He's a hunter. He knows I'm here. He can smell it. He's just waiting. He's waiting for me to make a move. He's waiting for me to run. And when he sees I'm not, he'll come here." "Then we'll face him together," she said. "No, this is my fight. You've done enough." "It's too late for that. Levi, it's been our fight from the moment you fell through that door." The argument was cut short by the sound of the front door latch clicking. It was not a knock. It was the sound of a key. Levi and Willa looked at each other in horror. "Abernathy," Willa whispered. "He has a key." But the door didn't swing open slowly. It was kicked open, slamming against the wall, the wood of the jamb splintering. Silas Vane stood in the doorway, the setting sun at his back, making him a tall, black silhouette. He was smiling, his teeth yellow. "Well, look at that," Vane said, his voice a dry rattle. He stepped inside, his own gun already in his hand, hanging loose at his side. "Found you, Carrington. Took me a while. Hiding behind a woman's skirts. That's low. Even for you." Levi shoved Willa behind him, his own hand streaking toward his gun on the table. "He was too slow." "I wouldn't," Silas warned. He raised his pistol, aiming it steady at Levi's chest. "This is a small room. I won't miss." "This isn't your fight, Silas," Levi said, his voice calm, his body shielding Willa. "Get out. It is my fight. You left a mess in Cheyenne, and there's a $500 bounty on your head, dead or alive. I prefer dead. Easier to carry." Vane's eyes flicked to Willa, who was peering from behind Levi. "Step aside. Girlie, I don't get paid to shoot you, but I will. I'll shoot through you to get to him." "Levi, don't," Willa whispered, her hand clutching the back of his shirt. "Last chance. Carrington," Silas snarled. His thumb pulled back the hammer of his revolver. The click was the loudest sound in the world. Everything happened in one shattering second. Silas's finger tightened on the trigger. Levi lunged for his own weapon. But Willa moved first. She would not be shielded. This was her home. She launched herself from behind Levi, slamming into his side, her voice a desperate scream. "No!" At the exact same instant, the door, which Vane had left open, was filled by another man. "Sheriff's office! Drop the gun!" Sheriff Brody yelled, his own pistol already drawn. The room exploded. Silas, startled by Willa's movement and the sheriff's voice, jerked his gun. A shot boomed, deafening in the small space. Willa's momentum carried both her and Levi to the floor. They crashed onto the pile of blankets where they had lain together. A second gunshot, almost simultaneous with the first, echoed, The lamp on Willa's sewing table exploded as Silas's wild shot went high, plunging the room into acrid kerosene-soaked darkness, lit only by the red cracks of the stove and the blue evening light from the doorway. Levi scrambled, pushing Willa beneath him.
"Willa, are you hit?"
A heavy body thudded to the floor. In the doorway, Sheriff Brody stood, his gun smoking. He looked at Silas Vane, who lay on the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. He was dead. Brody had not missed. Levi, his ears ringing, pushed himself up. He looked at Willa. She was pale, her hair wild, splattered with kerosene and tiny shards of glass, but her eyes were wide and alive. She was not hit.
I don't think so,"
she whispered, trembling. Levi got to his feet, pulling her up with him. He was shielding her, his own gun, which he had grabbed in the fall, still in his hand. Sheriff Brody stepped fully into the shop, his boot nudging the dead man. He looked at Vane. He looked at the splintered door. Then he looked at Levi, and his eyes were as cold and hard as a frozen river. "So," Brody said, his voice flat, "the rumors were true. You've been here all along. Carrington—" "He tried to kill us," Levi said, his voice rough. "He tried to kill you," Brody corrected. "And he's dead. That's one problem solved. But now I have another." He nodded at Levi. "You—" Levi straightened, pushing Willa further behind him. "I heard Abernathy was threatening the girl," Brody said, his eyes not leaving Levi's. "I decided to check on her. Looks like I got here just in time." He holstered his pistol. "That man," he gestured to Silas, "is dead. That clears one piece of trouble, but you're still here, and I don't want the rest of his gang riding and looking for him. Or for you."
"Sheriff,"
Willa said, her voice shaking.
"he saved my—"
"This woman," Brody cut her off, "is a fool. Just like her father. She's been harboring a fugitive. She lied to me. She's an accomplice." "She's the bravest person in this town," Levi growled. "She's the reason I'm not putting you in cuffs right now," Brody said. "I'm not arresting you. Carrington, not today. You didn't fire the shot, but this is your one and only warning." Brody took a step closer, his hand resting on his holster. His face was hard. "You are not welcome in Scar Hollow. I want you gone by sunrise. Leave or you hang. It's your choice." Sheriff Brody's words hung in the air, colder and heavier than the snow outside. "Leave or you hang." He did not wait for an answer. He looked at Willa, his expression a mixture of pity and frustration. "I'll send my deputy for the body. You'd best start cleaning up this mess. Miss Monroe, all of it." He turned and left, his boots crunching in the snow. The door, splintered and hanging crooked on one hinge, remained open, letting in the sharp, frigid air of the dying day. They were alone. Alone with the dead man on the floor. The smell of gunpowder and spilled kerosene thick in their throats. The broken lamp lay in 1,000 pieces, a glittering ruin on the floorboards. For a long moment, neither moved. The reality of what had happened, the violence, the death, the ultimatum, crashed down on them. Levi was the first to speak, his voice a low rasp. "He's right. We have to go." He grabbed his saddlebags, his movements jerky, desperate. "Pack, now. We can't wait for sunrise. We have to go as soon as his deputy leaves. We'll take the buckskin. She's had time to rest. We can ride her double as far as the pass. Then we'll find a fresh horse." Willa stood frozen, staring at the dark stain spreading from Silas Vane's body. "Willa, did you hear me?" He grabbed her arm, not gently. He pulled her away from the corpse, forcing her to look at him. "This is over. You heard him. Hang. He means it. And Abernathy, he'll take this place. He'll put you out in the street. You have nothing left here. Nothing." He softened his grip, his voice raw with a plea. "Come with me. We'll go to Oregon. I've heard it's green. A man can start over. We can start over. I'll build you a house. I'll do whatever you want. But we have to leave this town.
tonight.
She looked at him. His eyes were wild. The hunted look back in full force. He was the 19-year-old boy in the barn again, begging her to help him run. She pulled her arm from his grasp.
No!
What? His voice cracked. Willa, this is not a time for your pride. This is our lives. I told you, she said, her voice quiet. But the fragile, terrified girl from the confrontation was gone. In her place was the woman who had knelt in the mud. The woman who had endured 6 years of whispers. The woman who had just faced down a killer. Her voice was like cold iron. I am not running.
This isn't running, it's surviving, he shouted.
It is the same thing, she countered, her voice rising to match his.
I have been hiding in this shop for 6 years. I let them turn me into a ghost. I let them whisper. I let Abernathy threaten me. And for what? So I could run the second the wind blew too hard?
She advanced on him, her eyes blazing.
You don't get it. Levi, you never have. Running is what you do. It's what you did 6 years ago. You ran and you left me to clean up the mess. And now, violence comes to my door again. And your only answer is to run and drag me with you. You are asking me to become you, a fugitive, a ghost, and I will not.
So what? He yelled, gesturing at the body. You'll stay? You'll let Abernathy take this shop? You'll let Brody arrest you for harboring me? You think they'll listen to you? You're the town pariah, Willa, and I'm the killer they've always wanted.
Then I will be arrested,
she said, her voice dropping to a deadly calm.
I will stand in that jail cell, and I will let them see what they have done. I am not running. Not from them, not from Abernathy, not from you, not anymore. This is my home, and my name is all I have. I will not let you take that from me, too.
He stared at her, breathing hard. He saw the unshakable truth in her eyes. She would not bend. She would break first, and he, who had run all his life, was finally cornered. Not by a posse, not by a gun, but by the woman he loved. He sank onto the stool, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. He couldn't leave her, and she wouldn't leave. He looked at the dead man. He looked at the splintered door. He looked at her, standing tall and terrible in the ruin of her shop. All right, he said, his voice hollow. We don't run. He scrubbed his face with his hands. Then there's only one thing to do. He stood up. His movements were slow now, deliberate. He was no longer a fugitive. He was a man with a final, terrible purpose. He picked up his gun from the floor, unloaded the bullets, and placed the empty pistol on the table.
What are you doing?
She asked, her voice wary. Brody gave me a choice, he said. Leave or hang. He thinks I'm a coward. He thinks I'll run. I'm not going to. But I'm not going to hang for this.
What then?
I'm going to change the terms, he said. Abernathy and Brody, they want me gone. They want this to be over. But they want it quiet. They don't want a trial. They don't want federal marshals asking why a bounty hunter was shot in town. They just want the problem, me, to disappear. He looked at her, his eyes clear and cold. I'm going to give them a way out, but they have to pay for it.
Pay with what?
Your name, he said. I'll turn myself in. I'll take the blame for the man in Cheyenne. I'll go with Brody. Quiet, but in exchange, they have to clear you, publicly. They have to tell the town the truth, that you were just helping a man you thought was innocent, that your father was a good man. They have to give you your life back. Willa's heart stopped.
Levi, no, they won't do it. They'll just hang you.
They might, he admitted. But it's the only card I have to play. They want me. They can have me. But they have to set you free. Before she could argue, a wagon rattled to a stop outside. 2 men, one wearing a deputy's star, entered. They looked at the body, at Levi, at Willa, but said nothing. They wrapped Silas Vane in a canvas tarp and carried him out. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. When they were gone, the shop felt vast and empty. The blood stain on the floor a dark, accusing eye.
"Don't do this, Levi,"
she whispered, grabbing his arm.
"This is my fight. I'll go to Brody. I'll tell him everything."
"He won't believe you," Levi said, his voice gentle. He put his good hand over hers. "He'll just see a woman protecting her lover. No, this has to be my play. Me, for you. It's the only way." He would not be swayed. He spent the night on the stool, his back to the wall, watching the broken door. Willa, exhausted, finally fell into a restless sleep on her pile of blankets. The next morning, the sun rose into a clear, cold sky. The snow was beginning to melt, the sound of dripping water a constant rhythm. Levi stood. He was clean, his hair combed, his shirt tucked in. He had done what he could to make himself presentable. He was not going to face them as a vagrant. He put on his hat. "Stay here, Willa. Don't come out, no matter what you hear."
"Levi, please!"
He kissed her, hard and fast. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of goodbye. "You stayed? Now it's my turn." He walked out the door, into the bright, blinding sunlight, and left her alone. He walked down the center of the muddy street. The town was waking up. Faces peered at him from windows. Men shoveling snow stopped, their shovels halfway to the ground. This was the man they had been whispering about. He was not a shadow. He was real. He walked past the sheriff's office. He walked past Henderson's. He pushed open the doors of the saloon. It was early, but the place was already half full. Men were drinking coffee and whiskey, their voices low. At a back table sat Sheriff Brody, Mr. Abernathy, and two other men Willa would have recognized as the town council. When Levi entered, the room went silent. Every eye turned to him. Levi walked slowly toward the back table. He stopped 10 feet away. He was not armed. He took off his hat, holding it in his hands. "Sheriff, Mr. Abernathy, gentlemen." Brody's hand was resting on his holstered gun. "Carrington, you've got a hell of a nerve. I gave you until sunrise. The sun is up." "I know," Levi said, his voice calm, projecting so the entire room could hear. "I'm not here to run. I'm here to make a deal." Abernathy scoffed.
"A deal? You're a fugitive. You don't make deals. You hang—"
"Maybe," Levi said, his eyes locking on the banker. "But you don't want a hanging. It's messy. It brings questions. The dead man in Willa Monroe's shop. He was a bounty hunter. His friends will come looking for him. They'll come looking for me. A hanging will just prove I was here. You don't want that kind of attention. It's bad for business." Brody's eyes narrowed. The man had a point. "I'm wanted in Cheyenne," Levi continued. "I'll turn myself in. Sheriff, I'll ride out with you. Quiet. You can take me to the territorial marshal. I'll face the charges there. No mess, no questions. Your problem is solved." Abernathy leaned forward, his eyes glinting. "And in return, you don't do this out of the goodness of your heart." "In return," Levi said, his voice ringing with authority, "you clear Willa Monroe's name." The room erupted in whispers. "You will call a town meeting," Levi commanded, his gaze sweeping over the councilmen. "You will stand up, Mr. Abernathy, and you will tell this town the truth. You will tell them that 6 years ago, Willa and her father were innocent. You will tell them that I was just a boy who got in a fight, not a killer. You will tell them that this town, your town, destroyed a good man's name for nothing. You will clear her. You will clear her father. You will give her back her life. Do that, and I disappear." Abernathy's face went purple. "You are insane. You are in no position to demand anything. I will not be blackmailed by a common thug. I will not besmirch the memory of our late Mayor Vale." "Then you'll have to hang me," Levi said, shrugging. "Here, in the street. And I will yell. I will tell every man, woman, and child what you did. I will tell them how you and Mayor Vale covered up the truth to protect his nephew. I will tell them about the knife. I will tell them how you threatened a defenseless woman yesterday. I will make a very loud, very long speech from the gallows. And then my friends from Cheyenne will come, and they will make an even bigger mess." It was a standoff. Brody looked at Abernathy. The banker was sweating.
"He's lying?"
Abernathy hissed. "It's libel."
"Is it?"
a new voice said. The voice came from the bar. An old man, his hands stained with forge black, put down his coffee cup. It was Josiah Croft, the blacksmith, retired for 10 years. He was a man who spoke maybe 5 words a year, but every man in town respected him. Josiah turned, his eyes clear and sad.
"He's not lying. Not about all of it?"
Abernathy went pale.
"Josiah, you hold your tongue. You don't know what you're talking about."
"I know what I saw," Josiah said, his voice a low rumble. "I was there, 6 years ago. I was in the alley behind this very saloon. I saw the fight. It wasn't a fight. It was an ambush." The saloon was dead silent. I saw Anson Vale, the mayor's nephew, and 2 of his friends. Abernathy's boy was one of them. They had Levi Carrington pushed up against the wall. They were drunk. Anson was bragging about how he was going to cut the pretty boy up. And he pulled a knife, a pig sticker. Josiah looked at Levi. This boy, he was 19. He fought back. He broke Anson's arm, and he laid him out. But he didn't start it. He just finished it. He was defending himself. He then turned his gaze on Abernathy.
"I kept my mouth shut. The mayor and you said it was for the good of the town, to keep the peace. You said the boy was a vagrant. You said the Monroes were traitors for helping him. You lied. You ran that boy out, and you destroyed the Monroe family, to cover up the fact that your sons were drunken, knife-wielding cowards."
The truth, buried for 6 years, was finally out. It hit the room with the force of a physical blow. Men looked at Abernathy. They looked at each other. They remembered. They remembered Willa on her knees in the mud. They remembered her father, a good, kind man, walking out of town with his head bowed. Abernathy sputtered.
"This is an outrage. It's one man's word."
"It's my word," Josiah said, "and it's the truth." Word spread from the saloon like a lit fuse. People came out of their homes, out of the shops. The street began to fill. The town was fracturing. Some, loyal to Abernathy's bank, yelled that Carrington was a killer, that the old man was senile. But others, the women, the families, they looked toward the south end of town, toward the little tailor shop, and they felt a deep, creeping shame. Into this crowd, Willa walked. She had heard the shouting. She could not stay inside. She walked through the parted crowd, her head high. She was terrified. Her hands were shaking, but she did not stop until she was standing on the boardwalk in front of the saloon, facing the entire town. Levi saw her and his heart broke. He wanted to run to her, to shield her, but he knew this was her moment. Abernathy saw his chance.
"There she is, the harlot, the one who brings these men here. She's the blight. She's the problem."
Willa looked at the banker. She looked at the faces of the people who had scorned her for 6 years, and she spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, and it cut through the murmurs.
"He is right,"
she said. The crowd gasped. Levi stared, confused.
"I am the one,"
she continued. 6 years ago, I did help Levi Carrington escape. My father did nothing. It was me. I gave him my horse. I gave him my word. And he left. She looked at the faces of the women who had whispered about her.
"And you all turned your backs. You let Mr. Abernathy and the mayor destroy my family. You let my father die in disgrace. I stayed. I took your mending. I took your scraps. And I let the world turn me to stone. I hated this town. I hated you. And I hated him."
She turned her gaze to Levi. He was still standing there, his hat in his hands, his face a mask of agony.
"He left me once,"
she said, her voice softening.
"And I was alone. But yesterday he came back. After 6 years, he was wounded. and he was hunted, and he came back to me. And this town, you still wanted his blood. You, Mr. Abernathy, you threatened to ruin me. That man, Silas Vane, he tried to kill us, and Sheriff Brody, he told him to leave, to run, just like he did before." She took a step, standing beside Levi, and she took his hand, his empty, weapon-free hand. She held it up for the town to see. "He was going to run," she said, "but I told him no. I told him I would not run. And this morning, he walked in here, to you, to trade his life, for my name." She looked back at the crowd, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. "I spent 6 years being a ghost. I spent 6 years letting you define me. I am done. My name is Willa Ray Monroe. My father was a good man. And this man?" She gripped Levi's hand. "I choose him. I don't care if he's a fugitive. I don't care if he's a killer. He is the only man in this entire territory who was willing to die for me. He left me, but he came back, and I choose him." The silence that followed was absolute. Sheriff Brody looked at Abernathy. The banker was a broken man. His power was gone. Brody looked at Levi, and for the first time, he saw the man, not the fugitive. Brody sighed. He unpinned his badge and pinned it back on, a gesture of quiet decision. "Josiah Croft, I'll need your official statement, down at my office." He looked at Abernathy. "You too, banker. We have a lot to discuss." He turned to Levi. "Your deal. It stands. You're free to go with me. I'll take you to the marshal." "No," Willa said. Brody looked at her. "Ma'am, that was the deal." "The deal was for my name," Willa said, her voice strong. "Levi, you don't have to go. They know the truth. You can stay, here, with me." Levi looked at her. He looked at the crowd, their faces a mixture of shame, confusion, and a new, dawning respect. He looked at Brody. "Sheriff," Levi said, "I'm still wanted in Cheyenne. That's a separate matter." "It is," Brody agreed. "But given the circumstances, and Josiah's testimony, I think the territorial marshal might be very interested in the full story. Both of them. It seems to me you've been a victim as much as a villain." He nodded, a small gesture of truce. "You don't have to ride with me today. Carrington, you've got a broken door to fix. I'll be in touch." Brody turned and waded through the crowd. The spell was broken. People began to disperse, talking in low, urgent tones, casting backward glances at the banker, who was being escorted by the sheriff. Finally, it was just Levi and Willa, standing alone in the street. That night, the shop was quiet. The broken lamp was gone. The bloodstain was a dark memory, scrubbed but not forgotten. Levi had nailed a board over the broken door jamb. It was ugly, but it was strong. They sat at the small table, a single new lantern burning between them. The fire in the stove crackled. They were exhausted. The lust of their reunion was gone. The raw fear was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a raw, aching vulnerability. They were two survivors, sitting in the wreckage, finally at peace. Levi looked at his hands. He thought of the men he had ridden with, the things he had done. He thought of her speech, the way she had claimed him in front of the world. "Willa," he said, his voice quiet. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers. He was not the confident outlaw. He was not the desperate fugitive. He was just a man, laid bare. "Will you have me, scars and all?" Willa looked at him, at the healing line on his shoulder, at the deeper lines around his eyes, at the memory of the blood he had shed and the shame he had carried. She reached across the table, covering his hands with her own, her hands, chapped and scarred by 6 years of lonely work. "Only if you'll have mine." Their peace was a fragile, newborn thing. Levi's hand, now held openly in hers, was a testament to a battle won. But the war, he knew, was not over. His past was a long, dark shadow,
and it had not stopped chasing him. For 3 days, Scar Hollow lived in a strange, suspended state. The town was healing. Willa's name, spoken with scorn for 6 years, was now uttered with a new, awkward respect. Women who had crossed the street to avoid her now nodded, their eyes averted in shame. Sadie, the saloon girl, brought by a bottle of good whiskey, a gift she said was from everyone who ain't Mr. Abernathy. Mr. Abernathy himself was a ruined man. His power, built on fear and secrets, had crumbled with Josiah Croft's words. He was still in his bank, but the doors were closed. The town council was meeting, discussing his future and the future of the town. Sheriff Brody had been true to his word. He had taken Josiah's full sworn statement. He had taken Levi's. He was writing a long, detailed letter to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne. He had told Levi it was a gamble, but that truth, even late, was a powerful thing. "You're not a fugitive in my town. Carrington," Brody had said. "Let's see if we can't make that official." Levi set about fixing Willa's shop. The splintered door was the first thing. He spent 2 days at the lumber yard, planning and fitting new, thick planks. He built a door that could withstand a bull, and he hung it on new iron hinges. He replaced the shattered window. His hands, so used to a gun, surprisingly gentle with the glass. Willa watched him, her heart aching with a quiet, terrified hope. He was mending her home. He was mending her life. They were in the shop, the new door hanging sturdy in its frame, when the riders appeared. It was late afternoon, the sun beginning to drop, painting the muddy snow a pale, bloody orange. Levi was checking the new latch. Willa was at her machine, the thump-clack a rhythm of their new life. A boy from the livery ran past the window, his face pale. "Riders!" he yelled. "5 of them, coming from the south!" Levi went still. He looked at Willa. Her hands had frozen on her machine. "5," he said, his voice flat. He went to the new window, wiping the steam from the glass. They were coming down the main street, not fast, but with a slow, arrogant purpose. They were not lawmen. They were not prospectors. They were hard men, dressed for a long, ugly ride. And Levi knew them. "Get in the back," he said, his voice a low, urgent command. "What? Who are they?" Willa asked, rising from her chair. "It's Stone," he said, his hand already on the pistol he now wore, the one Brody had returned to him. "Jedediah Stone, the men I rode with, the ones from Cheyenne. They're not here for Silas. They're here for me." "Levi? No, Brody." "Brody can't handle this," Levi said, pushing her toward the back room. "These men. Stone won't talk. He won't make a deal. He sees me as a loose end, a traitor. He'll burn this town to the ground to get me, just to make a point." Willa's mind raced. The shop, the town, the women and children. She ran to a corner of the workshop, where a heavy, threadbare rug lay. She threw it back, revealing a thick trapdoor with an iron ring. "The cellar," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It's a root cellar. Small, cold, but it's stone." "Willa, there's no time. Not for me. For them." She ran to the new strong door, wrenched it open, and screamed at the top of her lungs. "Mrs. Henderson, Sadie, get your children. Get in here, now, to the cellar." The town, already on edge, reacted. Women, seeing the look on Willa's face, did not question. They grabbed their toddlers, their shawls, and ran, slipping in the mud, toward the tailor shop. Sadie burst out of the saloon, pulling 2 other girls with her. "What is it?" Sadie panted, her eyes wide. "No time," Willa said, pulling open the heavy door. A wave of damp, cold air rose. "Get in. Be silent. No matter what you hear, do not come out." In the street, Jed Stone and his 4 men had stopped. Stone, a big man with a graying beard and dead, black eyes, watched the panic at the tailor shop with a cold amusement. He saw Willa, a small, fierce woman, pushing people into her shop. "Well, now," Stone said, his voice a low drawl. Looks like Levi found himself a home. He dismounted, as did his men. They fanned out, their rifles in their hands. Sheriff Brody came out of his office, his hand on his holster. "That's far enough. Gentlemen, state your business in Scar Hollow." Stone laughed, a sound with no humor. "We're just here for a friend. Sheriff, man named Carrington. You send him out to us, and we'll be on our way." "Carrington is under my protection," Brody said, his voice steady, though he was 5-1. "You and your men will turn around and ride back out."
"That's not how this works,"
Stone said. He raised his rifle, not at Brody, but at the roof of the dry goods store, and fired. A shingle exploded. "We want the traitor. You've got 10 seconds to produce him. Or we start with your office, and then we burn that little shop he's hiding in, with the women inside." Inside the shop, Willa had gotten the last of the children into the dark. Mrs. Henderson gripped her arm. "Willa, come in. Bolt it from the inside."
"No,
Willa said. She looked at Levi, who was standing by the window, his face a mask of grief. He was torn. He could run, draw them off, but they would kill Brody and hurt the town anyway. He was trapped. Willa walked to him. She put her hands on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. She looked into his eyes. "You are not the boy in the barn," she said, her voice fierce. "You are not running, and you are not dying. Not for them." She kissed him, a desperate, angry, loving kiss. "I will bolt this door. I will not open it. Do you hear me? You end this, and you come back." He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He looked at the cellar door. "Bolt it! After me!" He stepped out of the shop, pulling the heavy new door closed behind him. Willa slammed the thick wooden bar across it. She heard the click of the iron latch. Then she ran to the cellar, climbed down into the darkness with the others, and pulled the heavy trapdoor shut. The street was silent. Levi stood on the boardwalk in front of Willa's shop. He was alone. "Stone!" he yelled. Jed Stone turned, a slow smile spreading across his face. "There he is, the prodigal son. You've been a hard man to find. Levi." "It's me you want," Levi said, his hands low, away from his gun. "Let the sheriff go. Let the town go. This is between us." "It was," Stone agreed, nodding. "It was between us, right up until you let that bounty hunter, Silas, follow you here. You got him killed. You broke the first rule. Levi, you brought the law to our doorstep. You brought trouble. And trouble." He raised his rifle. "Needs to be put down." Stone fired. Levi did not wait. He dove from the boardwalk, rolling behind a heavy watering trough. The bullet splintered the wood where he had been standing. The street exploded. Stone's 4 men opened fire, their bullets ripping into the front of Willa's shop. The new door held, but the glass window shattered, spraying shards into the room. Levi, from behind the trough, drew his pistol. He was a changed man. He was not the panicked brawler from Cheyenne. He was not the broken man who had fled for 6 years. He was fighting for his home. He fired 2 precise shots. One of Stone's men, reloading in the open, spun around and fell. "He's hit! Flank him!" Stone roared. 2 men broke left, running toward the alley. But before they could get there, a rifle shot cracked from the sheriff's office. One of the men stumbled, clutching his leg. Sheriff Brody stood in his doorway, his face grim, his rifle hot. "This is my town! Stone!" Levi's heart surged. He wasn't alone. He laid down covering fire, forcing Stone and the other man back behind a wagon. "Brody, the alley!" Brody nodded, moving to a window. The fight was now 2 against 3, the odds evening. The battle was short, brutal, and fought in the mud of the main street. Levi and Brody worked like men who had been partners for years. Brody's rifle kept them pinned, and Levi's pistol was fast and accurate. A second outlaw, the one Brody had wounded, tried to fire from the alley. Levi's shot was true. The man slumped against the wall. Jed Stone was furious. He was a wolf, and his pack was being destroyed. "You!" he screamed at his last man. "Take the sheriff! I'll kill the traitor!" Stone burst from behind the wagon, his pistol blazing, running straight at Levi. Levi rose from behind the trough, firing as he moved. A bullet tore through Levi's side, a hot, searing pain that took his breath. He stumbled, falling to one knee. Stone, a terrible grin on his face, raised his pistol for the killing shot. A rifle blast echoed. Stone's grin vanished. He looked down, surprised, at the red flower blooming on his chest. He fell forward, his face in the mud, not moving. Sheriff Brody stood on the boardwalk, his rifle smoking. The last man, seeing his leader fall, threw his gun into the street. "Don't shoot! I give up! I'm done!" The silence that fell was sudden and absolute, broken only by the groaning of the wounded man in the alley and Levi's ragged breathing. The town, which had been holding its breath, exhaled. Doors opened. Men, who had been hiding with their families, emerged, their faces pale. Sheriff Brody walked over to the surrendering outlaw and kicked his gun away. "Get on your face!" He then walked to Levi, who was on one knee, his hand pressed tight against his bleeding side. "You're a damned fool, Carrington," Brody said, his voice rough. "But you're a brave one." He holstered his pistol and offered Levi his hand, pulling him to his feet. "You're hit." "It's just a graze," Levi lied, his teeth gritted. "Sure it is." Brody looked at the bodies in the street. He looked at his town, shaken but whole. He looked at the man he had once been ready to hang. "That letter to the marshal," Brody said, pulling a handkerchief and pressing it against Levi's side. "I'm going to add a few things. About self-defense, about service to this town. I reckon by the time he reads it, the charges from Cheyenne will be a distant memory." Brody clapped him on his good shoulder. "You're a free man. Levi, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as this town is concerned, you've earned your clean slate." From under the floor of the tailor shop, Willa heard the silence. She heard the muffled voices. She pushed open the trap door. "Stay here," she told the others. She climbed out into her ruined shop. The window was gone, the air frigid. Glass crunched under her boots. The new door was pockmarked with bullet holes. She ran to it, her hands shaking so badly she could barely lift the bar. She stumbled out into the street. It was a battlefield. Mud, snowmelt, and blood. She saw the bodies. She saw the sheriff, his arm around the outlaw who had surrendered. She saw the townsfolk, staring. She did not see Levi. Her heart stopped. A cold terror, worse than anything she had ever felt, seized her. "Levi?" she whispered. She ran, back to the shop. He had to be there. He had made it back. He was slumped against the door, his body half in, half out of the shop he had rebuilt. His pistol was still in his hand, but it was hanging loose, his knuckles white. He was pale, his eyes closed. A dark, spreading stain was soaking his shirt and the new wood of the doorway. She fell to her knees in the mud beside him. "Levi, no!" The word was a sob, torn from the deepest part of her. All the fear, all the loss, all the years of waiting, culminated in this one terrible moment. "Don't leave me again." His eyes flickered open. He saw her, a blur of desperate love and terror. His gaze was broken, exhausted, but it was him. He looked at the gun in his hand, the symbol of the life he had led, the death he had caused, the past that had almost destroyed them. With a final, pained effort, he opened his fingers. The gun fell, clattering onto the boardwalk. He tossed it aside. He reached for her, his good arm, the one that wasn't covered in his own blood, and pulled her in. He pulled her out of the mud, into his lap, against his chest. He held her, his face buried in her hair. "Never again," he whispered. She held him, her tears soaking his shirt. He was wounded. He was bleeding, but he was warm. He was alive, and he was home. The harsh afternoon light began to soften. The townsfolk watched from a distance, their faces full of a new, profound understanding. Sheriff Brody tended to the wounded, but his eyes were on the two figures at the tailor shop. The air grew cold. The sky, which had been a harsh, unforgiving blue, turned a soft, gentle gray. And then, one by one, the first flakes of snow began to fall. It was not the driving, angry blizzard of his arrival. It was a quiet, peaceful snow. It fell on the rooftops. It fell on the muddy street, covering the blood. It fell on Willa and Levi, a gentle blanket of white, washing the world clean. Willa held him, and he held her. They were scarred, they were broken, but they were together. She gripped his hand, and he held it fast, as the snow brought peace, not ruin, to Scar Hollow. Thank you for listening to this story from Wild West. We would love to hear your thoughts on Levi and Willa's journey, so please share them in the comments below. Let us know where you're listening from. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories from the American West.